Timur watched Aidar. He remained where he was a moment longer before pushing himself up, the air catching against his skin as he moved. A brief tremor passed through him before he steadied, his shoulders tightening once before settling. Aidar noticed. Without turning, he reached into the bag, pulled out an extra shirt, and held it out behind him. Timur hesitated only a second before taking it.
Thanks.
For a moment, he just held it there. This is Men Being Too Intimate, Season 4. The line that holds. The steps stretched under the early light, the ground still holding the cold from the night. The air carried sound further across the grass. Figures stood spaced far apart, each set within their own line of work. Aidar stood with the eagle settled on his arm. He was in his early 30s, his build lean and steady, his posture set, shifting only when necessary. His grip firm but controlled, holding the bird without forcing it into place. The eagle adjusted once, its talons pressing into the leather. Aidar absorbed the weight, making a small correction in his hold before it settled again. The eagle lifted its head immediately, wings tightening, then opening slightly as it tested the air. Aidar watched it closely. He lifted his arm. The force left his arm in a single motion, the wings catching the air as it pulled upward, climbing fast into the open space. His eyes followed the bird.
Aidar!
A voice carried across the steppe. Aidar didn't turn. His gaze stayed on the eagle, tracking its line as it gained height, the distance building quickly as it cleared the horizon.
Aidar!
The voice came again, closer this time. He finished watching the flight before shifting his attention. Only then did he turn. Further along the ridge, another handler stood with his bird. Mid-20s. His stance less fixed, adjusting as he moved, the bird already responding before the motion had fully settled. Aidar looked once. Then his gaze moved back to the sky. The eagle had already taken its line. Aidar's hand dropped to the glove, tightening the strap where it had shifted under the release. He stepped forward, following the line. Timur came up from the lower ridge at a quick pace, the incline shortening his steps as he climbed. The strap at his wrist hadn't been fully tightened, and he pulled it into place as he moved, settling his grip without breaking stride. He slowed when he reached the rise. Timur adjusted through the release, shifting his footing to follow the bird as it climbed. He watched it only briefly before stepping off his line.
Aidar!
The call carried, but Aidar didn't turn. Then he stepped off his line and crossed the distance.
Aidar!
This time Aidar turned. Timur had already closed the space.
You didn't wake me.
Aidar looked at him once.
Go back.
Timur held his ground for a second. Aidar didn't change his tone.
Watch your bird.
The instruction landed without emphasis. Timur stepped back. He returned to where he should have been. His shoulders settled, his stance correcting before he lifted his gaze. Both birds were already out, carrying further across the open sky. After a moment, Timur glanced over. Aidar was already watching. The look held just long enough for recognition. Aidar gave a small nod. Timur's expression eased. He turned his gaze upward again, a faint smile settling in as he followed the birds across the steppe. The birds held their lines across the open sky, distant enough now that their movement read more as direction than form. Aidar tracked the flight with small adjustments of his gaze, shifting his position along the ridge by a step or two to keep the line clean. Timur stayed on his line, keeping his attention on the sky longer this time, his stance settled and his movements quieter after the earlier correction. Aidar glanced across once and found Timur already watching. He lifted his hand slightly, a small signal that didn't need to be repeated. Timur stepped off his line and moved toward him, keeping his pace measured. Aidar closed the distance from his side, stopping just short of where the ground dipped between them. They stood a few steps apart, both still angled toward the sky.
You're cutting it early,
Aidar said, his gaze not leaving the line above them.
Hold it until the line settles.
Timur followed his line of sight, adjusting his stance as if testing the timing again against what he had seen.
I had it,
he said. Aidar kept his attention upward.
You rushed it.
Timur let out a small breath and shifted his footing, resetting his position. As he moved, Aidar stepped in slightly, his hand coming to Timur's side in a brief, controlled contact that aligned him back into place before withdrawing just as cleanly.
I was going to make breakfast,
Timur said.
I overslept. You can make it later,
Aidar said.
Back to your line.
Timur held there for a moment. As he stepped back, Adar's gaze lowered just enough to meet his, the corner of his mouth lifting briefly before settling again. Timur caught it. Movement appeared from the far side of the ridge as two women approached along the path that cut across the slope, both carrying baskets. Aidar stepped toward them. His wife reached him first and handed over a wrapped bundle, the exchange practiced and familiar. The second woman set a thermos down beside them before stepping back, and Aidar spoke to her briefly before turning away. Timur paused where he was for a moment, then returned to his place along the line. A call carried across the steppe, followed by another answering from further along the ridge. The sound moved outward between them as the men adjusted their stance, lifting their arms slightly in preparation. Aidar turned back to the sky. Timur did the same. Above them, the birds had begun to circle. The birds had already been secured along the lower stretch, the line of perches holding steady as the others finished their routines. Aidar gathered what he needed. He checked each piece once, then tied it together. Timur watched. Aidar didn't look up. At first, it read like the same work as everyone else. Packing, finishing, resetting, but Aidar set his bundle apart from the others. Timur stepped in without asking. He picked up the edge of the canvas and folded it tighter. Aidar didn't stop him. They worked without speaking. Aidar finished first. He lifted the bundle.
Come on.
He turned along the ridge, not toward the path the others were taking. Timur fell in beside him. The sounds behind them dropped away. The ridge leveled out further on, the space opening without markers. Aidar slowed. He set the bundle down. Timur stopped a step behind him. Neither of them spoke. Aidar untied the rope and pulled the canvas free, shaking it once before spreading it across the ground. Timur moved closer as he sat, closing the distance by a fraction, enough that they shared the same space without needing to adjust again. Aidar finished unwrapping the food and held it out toward him. Timur took it, but didn't bring it to himself. He held it there for a moment, then shifted it back slightly. Aidar looked at it once, then leaned in and took a bite. Timur watched him as he did. Only after did he bring it back to himself and eat from the same place, the movement unhurried, the space between them unchanged. The wind moved once across the canvas. Aidar's gaze shifted, just enough to rest on Timur. He reached over and took hold of Timur's sleeve, then drew him in by a fraction. Timur didn't resist. The distance closed. Aidar gathered the cloth back over what remained, folding it in on itself with the same steady rhythm he'd used before, then tying it loosely and setting it aside. When Timur leaned in, their mouths met. Aidar's hands stayed briefly at Timur's side before dropping.
We've got time for more later.
Timur looked at him, the words taking a second to register.
Later? We're not going back today.
The statement came without emphasis, the same way he spoke about everything else. Timur blinked once.
You're telling me now?
Aidar's mouth shifted slightly, not quite a smile.
If you don't want it, we can head back.
Timur shook his head.
No, that's not...
He stopped himself.
You don't know how much...
His voice quieter.
It's been a while.
Aidar didn't answer. He turned and started walking, his direction already set. They moved along the ridge again, the space between them closing and opening with the terrain but never returning to what it had been before. The tent stood on a shallow fold of the ridge, the canvas pulled tight, its lines staked low against the wind. Timur knelt beside a small ring of stones until the flame caught and steadied. The fire held low, its light pushing outward. Aidar stood a few paces back. He watched without stepping in. The light moved across Timur's shoulders, shifting with each small motion. The rest of the steps stayed dark. Timur rose. Aidar closed the distance. His hand found Timur first, steady at his side, drawing him in just enough that the space between them disappeared. Timur met him there. Their mouths met again. The kiss held, deeper than before, unhurried, the rhythm already familiar. Aidar's hand moved to the back of Timur's neck, keeping him there for a moment longer before shifting lower, settling at his waist. Aidar's palm pressed at the small of Timur's back, bringing him closer. They moved inside the tent without speaking. The fire continued outside, its light shifting faintly through the canvas as the wind moved across it. A fox, small and pale against the dark, edged into the reach of the firelight. It paused, ears pricked, its eyes catching the glow as it studied the stillness of the place. It turned and slipped back into the grass, its shape dissolving into the dark as quietly as it had come. When they came back out, the fire had settled into coals. They sat on the spread canvas, closer now. Aidar leaned back against the bundled gear, one leg stretched forward. Timur settled between his knees, his back resting against Aidar's chest as if it had already been decided. Aidar's mouth brushed the side of Timur's neck. Timur let out a soft breath and leaned back into him. The fire burned lower. The steppe held steady around them. The light came slowly across the ridge, spreading first along the higher ground before reaching the fold where they had set the tent. The air had cooled through the night, but the warmth they had built inside the canvas still lingered in the space between them. Timur woke first, but he didn't move right away. Aidar's arm was still around him, the weight settled across his body. For a moment, Timur stayed where he was, listening to the steady rhythm of Aidar's breathing behind him. Aidar was still asleep. In the daylight, his face looked different. Timur let his gaze rest there a moment longer than he intended. Aidar stirred. It was a small movement at first, a change in breath, then the slow opening of his eyes as he adjusted to the light. His gaze settled on Timur already looking at him. Timur closed the space. His hand came up, resting at the side of Aidar's neck as he leaned in, the movement unforced as if it had already been decided somewhere earlier. Their mouths met, the contact softer than the night before, slower. When it ended, Timur didn't pull back completely. His forehead rested briefly against Aidar's, the space between them still close enough to hold. After a moment, he shifted. Aidar slipped out from under Timur's arm and sat up, reaching for his shirt, the movement steady, practiced, the same as any other morning. He pulled it on without looking back, already moving toward what came next. Timur watched him. He remained where he was a moment longer before pushing himself up, the air catching against his skin as he moved. A brief tremor passed through him before he steadied, his shoulders tightening once before settling. Aidar noticed. Without turning, he reached into the bag, pulled out an extra shirt, and held it out behind him. Timur hesitated only a second before taking it.
Thanks.
For a moment, he just held it there. Then he pulled it over his shoulders, slower than the rest, as if there were no reason to hurry. Outside, the steppe had already begun to move again. The wind carried lightly across the ridge. Aidar was finished first. He folded the canvas with care, smoothing it once before rolling it tight, then tied it off with the same precision he used for everything else. The bundle came together piece by piece, nothing left loose, nothing needing to be checked twice. Timur stepped in as he finished, his hand settling at Aidar's waist.
If it were different, this could be every day.
Holding him there for a moment. Aidar didn't respond. He stepped forward, lifting the bundle onto his shoulder, the motion clean, uninterrupted. That was enough. Timur let his hand fall. They started back. For a while they moved side by side, their pace settling into something even. The path didn't force them together now the way it had earlier, the openness of the field giving them space, but Timur didn't let it widen. His hand found Aidar's, his fingers closing around it as naturally as if the contact had always been there. They continued like that, the connection steady, unspoken, carried forward in the same quiet way everything else between them had been. As the land opened further, the shapes ahead became clearer. Figures moving across the field, the rhythm of the others already set into the day. The distance changed something. Timur felt it. He turned his head slightly, looking at Aidar. Aidar was already looking at him. Nothing needed to be said. Timur loosened his grip. Aidar let it go. Their hands separated without hesitation, the contact ending cleanly, leaving the space between them as it had been before. By the time they reached the edge of the others, there was nothing left to hide. One of the men broke away and came toward them, his pace quicker than the rest. He slowed as he reached Aidar.
Your wife's expecting you. You should head back.
Aidar's brow tightened slightly.
Now?
The man gave a small nod.
Just go.
Aidar held there for a moment, then nodded once, the decision already made. He turned without looking back. Timur shifted toward the gear, his hands moving automatically, picking up what had been left, folding, resetting. The same routine he had followed every other day.
What's going on?
Timur asked as another man stepped closer.
Aidar's going to be a father.
Timur's hands paused briefly against the fabric he was folding. The motion interrupted for no more than a breath before continuing. The line reformed along the ridge as the birds were brought out again, each man stepping back into position with the same quiet precision. Timur took his place with the others, setting his feet carefully before lifting his arm. He held it there for a moment, then released. The bird left him cleanly, wings opening wide as it caught the air and rose. Timur's gaze followed without interruption, fixing onto it as it found its line, the arc of its movement stretching further out across the pale expanse above the ridge. The presence of the others fell away, their movements and voices losing shape at the edges of his awareness, until there was only the bird and the path it carved through the air. It moved further out, then shifted, adjusting against the wind, its circle widening before tightening again as it responded to the current. Timur adjusted with it, his body following the same logic, the same control, his attention held entirely in the space above him. The bird circled again lower now, its path narrowing as it turned back toward the ridge. Timur didn't rush the moment, didn't call too early, letting the line settle fully before lifting his arms slightly in anticipation. Aidar came up beside him.
I'm going to be a father.
The words coming without restraint. He let out a breath that almost turned into a laugh, the shift in him clear, open in a way it hadn't been before. Timur didn't turn. His gaze remained on the sky, tracking the shift in the bird's movement as it angled inward.
You should watch your line.
His voice even, placed without force. Aidar's words slowed, then stopped. He remained where he was, close enough to disrupt the spacing, but not moving further in. The bird tightened its circle. Timur's arm lifted a fraction more, his body aligning with the descent.
It's coming in, you should go.
Right.
He stepped back, turning away from the line and moving off toward the others, his pace picking up as he went. The bird dropped cleanly, its wings angling in as it cut through the air toward the glove. The rest of the world returned in pieces, the voices, the movement, the shifting of the line as others began bringing their birds down, each one settling back onto the glove with a controlled weight as straps were secured and positions reset. The rhythm of the day resumed around him. A man approached.
Come on, let's grab breakfast.
Timur glanced at him briefly.
Not today.
The man paused, surprised for a moment, then let it pass, turning back. Timur moved toward his things, his hands working through the motions of packing, folding, tying, lifting, each action faster now, the sequence completed without pause. When he finished, he didn't wait. He moved first. The ridge opened ahead of him as he stepped away, the path leading outward without needing to be chosen. Aidar stood further out, visible against the stretch of field, his attention already drawn toward him. Timur saw him. He didn't slow. He didn't turn. Then the pace shifted. His stride lengthened, breaking into something faster as he moved away from the ridge. The shirt caught against him as he ran, dragging it free in a single motion and letting it fall without looking back. Behind him, Aidar's name was called. Men gathered around him. Aidar's expression was already opening into a smile. Timur was already further away, his figure cutting across the open ground, moving fast, not turning back.
Congratulations. You're going to be a great father.
Thanks.
Aidar smiled. An ENFP moves through the world by following what opens, step by step, drawn to what shifts, trusting what unfolds as it comes. For Timur, nothing holds unless it can move. An ESTJ moves differently, position by position, keeping things aligned, maintaining what's already been set. For Aidar, nothing lasts unless it stays where it belongs. They understood the lines from the beginning, where to stand, and somewhere between the open ground and the space outside it, the distance changed. But sometimes what's followed isn't where you remain. It's where you're called back. This is Men Being Too Intimate, Season 4. The line that holds. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more stories on gay audiobooks. Also, my short novel, Men Being Too Intimate series, are now available on Kindle Unlimited. You'll find a link in the description. YouTube membership is now open, behind closed doors. If you want to support me, please do join in. Thank you.